We're going to start with George Squires, whom I'm sure that most of you know George. He has participated with us before and always brings a good entertaining talk. George was part of the parade today, and if you saw that beautiful blue Oldsmobile convertible, that was George. So I'm going to call on George right now to come forward and open up our session with whatever George has to offer. George Squires.
Well, I'm going to tell you a little joke I heard just lately. It's a little bit cerebral, so you have to pay attention, and as John Wynne would say, I want you to listen up good. So this couple's been married about a year and a half, and she says to her husband, she says, you know, you've been spending too much time on the golf course, you're spending time hunting and fishing, you're spending time curling and bowling, you're hardly ever at home, you've got to cut back on this, as a matter of fact, you should give it up. And he says, you sound like my ex-wife. She says, I didn't know you were married before. He says, I wasn't. I'm going to introduce my wife, Marlene. Marlene, stand up, please, and take a bow. Marlene Dahl. I met this gorgeous woman on the first day of school at the age of 6 in grade 1. We were married the day after John Kennedy was assassinated. So I always had a one-day warning of the wedding anniversary. 2 weeks after we were married, anyway, we moved into an apartment that I had rented with another guy. I obviously kicked him out in favor of her. That was an easy decision. And we had one hell of a good party. And the landlord didn't really like it, so we were kicked out of there. We moved into a motel in Saskatoon, and I was working quite hard to finish off a master's degree thesis. Now, it was taking far too long, and the motel wasn't working out, so I said to Marlene, you know, maybe we should go back to Watrous and downstairs into the rumpus room and the roll-out couch. And everybody had a rumpus room then. And so Marlene went back and stayed with her folks. And I moved into the men's residence at the university. And I would head back to Watrous on the weekends. Well, this one weekend I phoned Marlene and I said, I'm not coming home this weekend. I'm going to finish this darn thesis and get it done. And I did. I got it done about midnight Saturday night. And I hopped in the car and I drove home, I drove to Marlene's home. And there was a side door to the house, went straight down the stairs, turned the left corner to the rumpus room. It's dark. And every rumpus room had a kind of a frosted glass ceiling panel with colored lights behind it. So I turned on the colored lights and had a look. Yeah, there's this curly head on the pillow. Turned it off, started to get undressed, and then I thought, you know, that didn't really look like Marlene. So I turned on the lights again and I had a closer look. And it was pretty good looking, but it wasn't Marlene. So I had no idea where she was in the house, so I went and stayed at my parents' house, who lived a block away. And the next day, after I had breakfast at their place, I went over to Marlene's place. Her dad had gone to work or whatever, and her mom and her sister Dorothy were there, and maybe Aunt Dorothy, I'm not sure. And I told them what had happened the night before. And they laughed because there had been an Anglican church synod where all the bishops and ministers and their wives were invited to Watrous and Manitou Beach to do planning sessions for the Anglican church. But one of the ministers got sick, but his wife showed up. So it was a minister's wife in the basement. Marlene could have maybe been sleeping doubles with her and gone upstairs to the bathroom or something, and I could have snuggled up to her and then been caught by Marlene in her own home with the minister's wife. Crazy. one of the things, we're a couple that found each other very early, and there are a lot of our class that married their girlfriends in school. There's Dwayne and Kathy Engel, there's Bob and Jean Clements, there's Wolf and Diane Richard, there's Alec and Esther Monroe, and there's many others. It's quite something, and I think there's never been a divorce. I think maybe it's because we are the stubborn kids of the stubborn pioneers. And there's a lot of love. Hockey. We had a 2-game total goal tournament in a Saskatchewan-wide competition. We played against Davidson. The first game was in Watrous. And Davidson kicked our butts 15-1. We didn't dare walk down Main Street, we'd get spit on. The next week we went over to Davidson and we beat them 15-3. So they won the total point 18-16. We had another hockey game which was out in Viscount, and there was a terrible snowstorm. 6 cars got stranded coming back. We spent the night in the cars in this blizzard. And some of the smokers were so desperate, I was in the Engel car, that they were reaching under the seat covers to smoke cigarette butts that had probably been in there for 5 years, and I was glad I had never taken up smoking. But on the subject of tobacco, I worked for Jeff Baker, who was a contractor, did everything from cabinets to digging ditches, whatever, cement work, you name it. And we were working on the cement work for what used to be Barron's Welding Shop, and it's now that Quonset hut behind, I guess, the Co-op store. And we're pouring cement. I'm shoveling gravel on one side of the cement mixer, and Arnie Mittman was there for the day shoveling gravel on the other side, and Don Duncan was handling the cement and the water. Jeff Baker went over to the Cameo and got some salmon sandwiches. And so we had salmon sandwiches. And then Arnie pulled out a tin of snooze and he put it in his lip and he said, "Would you like to try this?" Well, I tried cigarettes and I didn't like it, but I thought I'll give this a try. So I gave it a try and I barfed my guts out. And if you want to make me sick, put a salmon sandwich on it. We played hockey against Simpson, and of course there was, so many guys, but one of the guys I remember is Pat Newman. He was the youngest of 12 boys. And you all know about the Newman family. They're notorious. I don't think many of them kept out of jail their whole lives. And we thought Pat would make it. He was actually quite a nice guy, but he got into the booze too. And so, at one point in time, the officer in charge of the RCMP in Watrous bought the house next door to Mom and Dad. So he and Dad would have a celebration cocktail occasionally, maybe celebrating sunset or something important like that. And he said, "Doug, I've got to tell you what happened last night." He said, "I was on highway patrol down towards Simpson, and I see this car weaving up the road, and I pull it over, and it's Pat Newman, and he's drunk." And he says, "Pat," in those days, he says, "Pat, you get back to Simpson, you go to bed, I don't want to see you ever again tonight." And so he carries on. About 2 in the morning, he sees another car coming up the road leaving, and it's full of natives who are plastered, and he is having trouble, and he's getting worried about how he's going to handle this situation. And he sees another car coming up from Simpson, and out comes Pat Newman, and he says, "Officers, are these sons of bitches giving you any trouble?" He said, "It's the only time I was ever happy to see a Newman." The Heritage Center. I want to talk about some pioneers, and I think one of the last pioneers we had was Marlene's dad, Albert Dahl. And the Dahl family moved up from Minnesota. We were at a family reunion down there a few years ago, and in a park, state park, is a 2-story log house built by Marlene's dad's dad, so her grandfather. And that's quite a wonder to see. But they came up and they homesteaded around Swift Current, right? I was trying to think of the small town, Cabri, yeah. And there were 7 kids. In 3 years, his father died, his father died of tuberculosis, his older brother died of a horse runaway, and the next older brother died of a gun accident. So Albert was the head of the family, moved with his mother and the remaining 4 kids plus him up into the Simpson area. He had 2 terrible bouts with tuberculosis, almost died. Fortunately, the good neighbors helped out. He had 1 terrible case of blood poisoning, almost died. He lost two of his fingers. One, his wedding ring caught on a nail on the truck and pulled off this finger. And the other, of course, every farmer had to lose a finger at some point in time to an auger. So, what do you do for a living? I farm. He was one of the happiest guys I've ever known. I think he always had a smile. He always worked. And I think the reason he always had a smile was that life threw so much at him, he couldn't do any harm. He beat it. Now my dad quit school at grade 10. And he and a friend went off to Hollywood to become movie stars. Everybody at that age, Hollywood was full of potential movie stars washing dishes in restaurants. And that's where he started sign painting, because the restaurant he was washing dishes in needed a new sign. Soon he was making money painting signs down in Hollywood. And he did write home to his dad to send some money so he could come back to Canada. He did his grade 11 and 12 through a correspondence course in 1 year. He went to what was called normal school, or teacher's college. And if you had your grade 12 and a year of teacher's college, you were allowed to teach school. Mom went to university when she was 16, and she also went to teacher's college. They got married. And they taught in little schools around Saskatchewan. And they realized, at $500 each a year, this wasn't going anywhere. So Mom went back to the family farm. They were homesteaders around a bigger area. And Dad went down to radio college in Toronto, became a radio technician, and got a job with CBC, worked at CDK Watrous. Now, Dad was on I didn't tell you that Albert Dahl, Marlene's dad, was on the town council for 17 years. And my dad was on the school board. He was chairman of the school board for several years. And through some happening of fate, when they're hiring new teachers, they happened to fall upon Lionel Sproul, and they hired Lionel Sproul. And Lionel went up to Dad and he said, how come you picked me? Thank you very much for doing that. And Dad said, well, we talked it over and we thought, better the devil we know than the devil we don't. Now, a new school was built during Dad's tenure. And Dad made several statements about, and in front of D.A. Cumming, who was the principal, and many others, that the first kid that damages that school is going to be in a lot of trouble. So Keith Dewey and I got thrown an ink bottle across the schoolroom, and Keith threw one a little hard back to me, so he got it back with interest, and then I got that back with interest, and then I threw a really hard one, and it was high and to the left and hit the wall and splashed ink all over the ceiling and the wall. And so the first dumb kid that wrecked that school was me. And of course, Marlene thought that was just great. Now I'm going to be in trouble. Well, D.A. Cumming, the principal, did not punish me because he knew that would be taken care of at home. And it was actually quite simple because I worked summers for Jeff Baker, and Jeff repaired it at no cost. It was done very quickly. So got away with that one. I'm going to end this with, I think, the finest compliment that's ever been paid to my parents. Every fall I come out here and hunt with old school friends, and it's 2 weeks of alcohol poisoning and sleep deprivation called hunting, yes. And there's this ducks and geese landing in a farm near Amazon. And there's a little farmhouse across the road, and I knock on the door of this little farmhouse, and this sweet little old lady answers, and I said, is that your land across the road? And she said, yes, it is. And I said, well, there's ducks and geese going in there, and we'd like to get permission to hunt tomorrow morning, if that's okay with you. And she said, who are you? I said, I'm George Squires. And she said, are you a son of Ann and Doug? And I said, yes. And she said, I get choked up with it. She said, you can hunt on any of our land anytime you want. Didn't know me, knew the family. Fantastic. So we contributed some money to the Heritage Center, and we did it because we had inherited some money from our parents. And Marlene and I decided what better way to return it to the community than this. So be generous. Donate until it hurts. Thank you.
Thanks, George. George feels pretty strongly about this community. As you know, he was the first major donor that we've had contribute to the Heritage Center. His generosity has certainly spurred other people to become generous, and the center is actually, we're doing pretty well. I suggest that you may want to spend some time. We have a table down there and a couple of volunteers working there to get some information about this. I will forewarn you that we are always looking for money. Our purpose is to buy what is the Water Resources building on Main Street and to change it so that we can use it as a heritage center. Our communities, the beach, the town, and the area around are phenomenal. And that's what George was telling you. This place is unique. It's a favorite of a lot of us, and that's why so many people keep coming back. And we don't want to lose that. We want to keep that, the history of it, the history of CBK, the history of Manitou Beach, the Aboriginals that were here. We need to keep that for your past and your kids and your grandkids' future. And that's the purpose of what we're doing. So please take the time to check with some of those people over there. We will get to almost everybody that we can find and ask for donations. We ask you to be generous when we come. Don't necessarily give us your firstborn child, but that's a possibility. But be generous. We will be there. The other announcement is that the host committee has extra meal tickets. And so if you or if you know of someone who didn't get meal tickets, they are available. And the table right down there in the corner. Go to them, you can get a meal ticket. Go to the table further over and you get information about the Heritage Center.